You know what's funny? They always said Lucas had the makings of a leader. He had that look, that voice, that confidence people notice from across a room. But no one ever asked what I had the makings of. Not once. I wasn't just left out of my brother's ceremony. I was written out of it. Long before the invitations ever got printed. My name's Danielle Langford. But growing up in the Langford house, you'd think I didn't exist. Unless you were calling roll for dinner. And even then, it was just, sit up straight, Danny, or don't talk back, or, worse, nothing at all. It's strange what you start to believe when no one sees you. You begin to wonder if being invisible is safer than being disappointing. But here's the part no one expects: I didn't stay invisible. I left. I left before they could shape me into someone else's shadow. And this is the story of why I had to. Tell me something, have you ever been the quiet one in the family? The one no one claps for, the one they forget to mention unless they need something. Then maybe you'll understand why I signed those papers. Why I got on that bus, and why for the first time in my life I did something that made me feel real. Let's go back. Back to the dinner table. Back to where silence felt like safety and love had conditions. Because this story doesn't start with war. It starts with meatloaf. It was always meatloaf on Thursdays. Always dry, always the same dented pan. And always 6 o'clock sharp because dinner is at 1800, as Dad would say. Even years after he hung up the uniform, that voice stayed sharp as a whistle. Orders came with a fork and knife. Lucas would fill the silence. He was good at that. Talking about ROTC drills, how coach said he had potential, how the recruiter said leadership runs in your blood. I tried mentioning my science essay once, placed third in state. Dad blinked. Good. Pass the salt. Mom didn't even look up from her plate. I learned that lesson early. Talk too much, you're needy. Too quiet, you're moody. But if you stay right in the middle, polite, helpful, invisible, no one has anything to complain about, also means they forget you're even there. There was this one night, I think I was 13, I brought home a sketch I was proud of. Colored pencils. A red-tailed hawk mid-flight. Not traced. Not copied. Just something that came out of me. I left it on the counter next to the mail. When I came back, it was gone. Tossed out with coffee filters and junk coupons. No one said a word. But Lucas's Pee-wee football trophy still sat on the mantle in the living room. 10 years old, faded gold. Still deserved a place. So I stopped drawing. Stopped trying, really. And people started calling me easy. Low maintenance. Such a helper. Funny how being overlooked starts sounding like a compliment. At the career fair sophomore year, I walked around in a borrowed blazer. Navy blue. A little too tight. Every booth I stopped at, they looked over my shoulder. Smiled at Lucas instead. Army. Navy. Air Force. All asked for him by name. He wasn't even in my class. So I sat on the bleachers and just watched. Watched the recruiters line up for my brother like he already had his own rank. No one asked what I wanted. Not even me. But something shifted that spring. I remember walking past the mailbox and seeing my name for once. A letter from the recruiting office. I'd asked for it on a whim. Filled out the form in a quiet computer lab. Didn't tell anyone. The envelope was light. Too light to matter, probably. But when I opened it, it said preliminary eligibility confirmed. That night at dinner, I looked around the table. Lucas was talking about West Point. Dad looked proud. Mom actually smiled. And I just sat there, holding the news in my chest like a pebble under the tongue. They didn't ask what I'd done that day. Didn't notice I hadn't touched my food. And I realized something: I could disappear right then and there and no one would notice till the dishes were done. So I waited. Saved every flyer, every form. Talked to the recruiter alone. Scheduled the physical on a day no one asked where I was. And on my 17th birthday, I signed the papers. I signed them with a pen I bought myself. Blue ink, neat cursive, just one name, mine. And 2 weeks later, while Lucas was getting fitted for a suit for his military banquet, I was already gone. No goodbye, no speech, no folded flag or camera flash, just a duffel bag, a bus ticket, and a heartbeat that said you exist. I didn't join because I admired him. I joined because I needed to matter somewhere. Somewhere I didn't have to raise my voice to be seen. Somewhere I wasn't just Lucas Langford's sister. Somewhere I could be just me. And then the boots hit gravel and the silence turned into orders. He didn't say it like an insult. He said it like a prophecy. Like he'd always known I'd end up right where he was just 2 steps behind. "You're too careful, Dani." That's what he said. Right before everything started to fall apart. The overhead fluorescents in the briefing room hummed like they had something to say. Cold light. Cold tile. Cold air from the vents blowing right down my collar. I'd been up since 0300. Mapping coordinates. Double-checking terrain, making sure the satellite pass would line up at 0145 just like I'd planned. I don't take shortcuts, not because I'm scared, but because I know what happens when you miss something. One wrong contour line, one wind shift, 1 second too late, and someone doesn't come home. My team was quiet behind me. They trusted the plan, so did I. Until the door creaked open and he walked in. Major Langford. Same last name, different world. Lucas strolled in like it was a barbecue. Grinning. No notebook, no gear. Just his rank and a smile that still worked on people. Morning, Captain. He said it like he was teasing. Like this was still a family kitchen and not a live op briefing. He walked right up to the digital board, hands in his pockets. "You're setting insertion for 0145. I nodded. Satellites clean then. Night cover optimal. Intel confirms light movement on the ridge by 0200. He made a little sound, half smirk, half sigh. Let's go early. Move at 2230. Catch them off rhythm. I blinked. No updated pass, no ground recon, he shrugged. That's the point. Silence pressed in. The kind that tastes like metal. I looked to Colonel Foster. He tapped a pen against the edge of the desk. Didn't even glance at my files. Sounds aggressive. I like it. Lucas smiled. The kind of smile that gets you applause. Or casualties. I kept my face still. Kept my voice lower. Sir, if we insert blind, we compromise terrain. Night fog is holding in the valley. No way to guarantee a safe drop. Colonel waved it off. Major Langford's instincts haven't failed us yet. I wanted to scream. But I've never been the one who raises her voice. Lucas clapped me on the shoulder on his way out. You always did love coloring inside the lines. It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. And I swallowed it. Like I always did. By 2100 the room was cleared. Everyone off to prep. I sat there alone under the glow of that map. I could have filed an objection. Could have fought harder. But I knew how this worked. Same as when we were kids, his voice carries. Mine gets filtered out, so I went to the armory. Checked gear twice. Triple-checked comms. Ran through every contingency, even the ones we weren't allowed to admit might happen. I found myself tightening the strap on my vest again and again. Like if I pulled hard enough it might hold the anger in. By 2200 I was on the tarmac. My team gathered, silent, focused, young. Too young. I looked at their faces and realized none of them knew what this was really about. It wasn't about tactics, it was about pride, and I was walking them into it. The wind picked up. A cold one. Carried the smell of fuel and old gravel. We climbed into the bird. And just before the doors sealed, I turned to the aide waiting with final orders. Major Langford isn't joining. She blinked. No, ma'am. Command says he'll be monitoring from HQ. Of course, he wasn't going in. I was. I gave one last nod. Then the roar swallowed us whole. And I realized this wasn't about proving anything to him anymore. It was about making sure these kids came home. Even if I had to carry them. Even if I didn't come back, The explosion didn't just take a life. It took mine quietly piece by piece. No one talks about the cold sweat that forms under your gear. Not the kind from heat, the kind from knowing something's wrong before you see it. We hit tree line at 22:48. I remember because I checked my watch. Twice. Visibility was poor. Fog laced through the trees like breath that wouldn't clear. The forest felt too still. Even the insects went silent. Dean was just ahead of me. Young, eager. He kept his boots quiet like I taught him. We moved slow. No chatter, just hand signals and muscle memory. Then it happened. A flicker, a light, a sound that didn't belong. Click. I didn't even get the word out. Just the inhale. Then the ground lifted itself off its spine. I didn't hear the explosion so much as feel it, like my lungs got kicked inward. I hit the dirt hard. Ears ringing. Mouth full of leaves and panic. When I opened my eyes, the fog was fire. Dean lay 10, maybe 15 feet ahead. Face down, no helmet, I crawled. Elbows bleeding. Couldn't stand, couldn't think. Dean no response. I flipped him. Blood in his mouth. One eye open. Still warm. I pressed down on his stomach. Hard. Too late. He blinked. Once, and then. Gone. My throat wouldn't make sound. Only my hands moved. Trying to undo the impossible. Radio crackled broken, extraction rerouted, landing zone hot. I carried his tags. That's all I could carry. By the time we got back to base, I couldn't feel my legs. But I didn't cry. Not once. In the medical bay, they asked routine questions. Name, rank. Did I lose consciousness? I said no. Even if I had, I wouldn't have admitted it, because that's what they'd latch onto. The report came a day later. Preliminary cause: unauthorized deployment timing. Operational misjudgment. There was a hearing, a table, 3 men in uniform, 1 woman in a tight bun who didn't blink once. They asked when I approved the change. I said I didn't. They asked why I didn't object. I said I did. They asked who made the final call. I said Major Langford. They looked at each other. Wrote something down. Dismissed me. Lucas never showed. Just a memo. 2 paragraphs. Contextual deviation from protocol under assessed situational risk. No signature. Just a digital stamp. 3 weeks later, a letter came. Suspension pending review. Operational integrity in question. I packed my things in silence. Put my name patch in my palm, held it like a scar that hadn't healed. Then I went home. Back to San Antonio. The air smelled the same, dry grass and car oil. Dad was in the garage polishing a plaque. Lucas's newest. Something about leadership in uncertain times. He didn't look up, didn't say welcome home. Just nodded at the socket wrench. I stood there for a minute, then walked inside. The kitchen hadn't changed. Same magnets. Same dented meatloaf pan in the sink. On the counter an envelope. Invitation. Lucas's promotion event. No note, just my name on the flap. Mom passed by. Didn't say a word. Didn't ask how I was. Just looked through me like I was still in uniform, still invisible. I went to the event. Early, wore civilian clothes. Security didn't even glance at me. Name wasn't on the list. I showed them the envelope. They shrugged. Not on here, ma'am. I watched through the glass. Lucas laughing near the stage, medals on his chest, mic in his hand. The crowd loved him. And I stood on the other side. No badge, no welcome, no family. That was the day I walked away. From the family, from the uniform, from ever being Langford enough. They didn't come to my hearing. But I still heard their silence louder than any verdict. You learn after a while that absence has its own voice. It's not loud, but it echoes. I moved to Asheville in the spring of 2021. Rented a small 1-bedroom above a hardware store off Haywood Road. It smelled like cedar and rust. Rain tapped the windows like it had nowhere else to go. No uniform in the closet. But I kept the name patch. Right on my desk, folded, stiff, still mine. At night I microwaved frozen meals. Let them cool too long. Tasted like regret and salt. The report sat on my kitchen table for weeks. The debrief. 36 pages of numbers, timestamps, coordinates. I read it once. Twice. Then again with a pen in hand. Something didn't sit right. The timeline, the shift. The order to move early wasn't signed, wasn't logged, just assumed. I dug. Opened old inboxes. Searched for digital trails. There was a gap between 0120 and 0200. The satellite pass was supposed to be at 0145. That was my plan. That's what I wrote, but someone moved us up. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then one night an email came. Unmarked. No subject. It was from Colonel Maria DeWitt. We hadn't spoken since the inquiry. Just one sentence. Check satellite logs 0145, then ask who bypassed coordination protocol. I logged in with an old credential. Still worked. Still tied to my name. The satellite logs showed nothing. Because by 0145, we were already in the woods. But buried in a logistics thread, a message from a secure user. Signed L. Langford. Timestamp 21:57 the night before. Message read, "We'll move early. Trust me. I'll take the heat if needed." No CC. No clearance, just charisma dressed as command. I sat back. Stared at the wall. Then I opened a new document, titled it Clarification of Timeline Operation Winterglass. I attached everything. Screenshots. Logs. The memo. My original op sheet. And at the top I typed, "For the record, not for revenge." I signed it with initials, not rank. Just D. Langford. Then I clicked send. Straight to the Office of Military Ethics. Encrypted. No BCC. Afterward I walked to the sink, poured cold coffee down the drain, let the cup rattle against porcelain until it stilled. Then I returned to the desk. Picked up my name patch. Folded it once. Twice. Pressed it flat like paper between palms. And placed it on top of the laptop. I wasn't asking to return. I wasn't even asking to be heard. I was making sure there'd be a record. One where my name stayed on the page. That night it rained heavier. Roof clanged like tin memories. Each drop sharper than the last. I lay down without turning off the desk light. Didn't need to sleep. Just needed to breathe. The next morning my inbox had one reply. Not from family. Not from Lucas. It was from command. I wasn't just on the list. I was the list. Spring, Washington, D.C. The kind of night where the air smells like pressed linen and polished brass. Where everyone walks like they rehearsed their stride in a mirror. I got there early, I always do now. It's not about nerves, it's about control. The banner outside read 12th Infantry Division, Centennial Gala and Honor Roll Ceremony velvet red. Gold threading. Every inch of it screaming prestige. I stepped inside. My heels clicked against the granite. The echo followed me all the way through the corridor, louder than applause, quieter than doubt. The lobby glowed in soft amber. Uplighting danced across polished marble columns. Everything looked intentional. Like every piece knew where it belonged. I looked up at the LED screen rotating the evening's highlights. There it was. Center. Bold, unmissable. Keynote honoree, Brigadier General Dani Langford. No initials, no suffix. No sister of. Just me. I adjusted my jacket. Charcoal gray. Clean lines. Stars on my shoulders, not borrowed, not gifted. Earned. Across the ballroom I spotted Lucas, gray at the temples now. Still standing like a man who thought the room owed him space. He didn't recognize me at first. Not fully. But I saw the flicker in his eyes when it clicked. He didn't wave, didn't nod. just turned slightly enough to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Let him. The room filled fast. Commanders, dignitaries, rising stars in uniforms so new they still creaked at the seams. I walked among them. Some nodded, some stared, a few saluted before catching themselves. And from the far corner, 2 young cadets whispered my name like it was myth. The lights dimmed, spotlight on stage. A voice came through the PA rich and round. Tonight we honor not just service but resilience. This next name was once left off the list. Today she leads the very standard they tried to bury. Applause rolled like a slow wave. Not wild. Not forced. Measured. Solid. Standing. I walked forward. Ribbon perfect. Each step sharp. The metal pinned over my heart didn't weigh much, but it landed with every footfall. I reached the podium. Looked out over a sea of pressed uniforms and familiar indifference, took a breath, and adjusted the mic. I was once told I was too careful, I began. My voice didn't tremble, didn't rush. Turns out, careful survives. And careful commands. A pause. No speech tonight, just presence. Because sometimes that's the thing they never expect you to keep. And then, from across the crowd, I saw their faces, my father, my mother, Lucas. All sitting together. Not one of them looked away. The lights outside the ballroom felt warmer, softer maybe. Or maybe it was just that I could finally breathe. Applause still echoed faintly through the doors. Behind them people still shook hands and clinked glasses, but out here the silence returned, and in the corner like misplaced portraits they stood. My father rigid. My mother wringing her hands like a napkin she'd forgotten to fold. Lucas still standing like he owned the room, but his eyes were quieter now. Half arrogant, half cracked. I walked past them once. Outside a different ceremony. My name missing. My presence ignored. Now they waited. For me. He was the first to speak. Dani. No rank, no salute, just the sound of his failure wrapped in syllables. I turned slowly. General Langford, I said, voice even. Tonight that's who they came to see. Dad cleared his throat. Old habit probably. You could have told us, he said, trying to sound firm. But it landed like a question. I met his eyes. Level. Dry, you could have asked. Margaret tried next. Soft, uncertain. We didn't know, she said. Fingers tugging at the hem of her sleeve. I nodded once. You didn't want to. Lucas stepped forward. It wasn't supposed to go that way, he offered. As if rewriting the past could soften its teeth. I looked at him. At the man who once said I was too careful. It didn't, I replied, because I came back. I stepped closer. Not in threat, in claim. You believed silence, I said. I chose clarity. You trusted the loudest voice. I paused, let the words land. I trusted truth. He opened his mouth, I lifted my hand. Don't, I said. Calm. Final. I don't hate you, Lucas, but I will never forget what you let happen to me. They all stood there. The family that once made me feel invisible, now unable to look away. I took one breath. Only one. And turned. Because I didn't need to sit at their table anymore. Didn't need an apology wrapped in cold wine and small talk. I built my own table, one that seats only the unafraid. And as I walked away, the only sound I carried with me was the quiet click of my heels and the faint distant echo of applause that no one could take away. Funny thing is, what I remember most from that night wasn't the lights or the applause. It was the way he said my name, no rank, no ceremony. Just Dani. Like he finally realized what he let go of. I didn't come back to punish anyone. I came back to stand in my truth. Because not every wound needs forgiveness, some just need to be acknowledged. Sometimes closure isn't a door slamming shut, it's a quiet step forward on your own terms. If this story reminded you of someone who stayed silent or someone who silenced you, I'd love to hear what it stirred in you. Drop a comment, share your thoughts. You never know who might need to read them.